The autumn air in West Germany carried the scent of fallen leaves and diesel fumes as Prince Charles stepped off the royal aircraft at RAF Gütersloh. October 1987 had brought an unexpected invitation that would change everything he thought he knew about his relationship with Diana. The British forces Germany had extended a casual invitation for the royal couple to visit their troops, but this wasn't going to be another formal inspection with white gloves and prepared speeches. Diana emerged from the plane wearing a simple navy blazer and jeans, her blonde hair catching the afternoon light. Charles noticed immediately that she had chosen comfort over protocol, something that would have horrified the palace staff back in London. Her choice reflected a growing confidence that had been building since their last few public appearances together. The press had been particularly harsh about their marriage lately, with tabloid headlines suggesting coldness and distance between them. "Ready for this?" Diana asked, adjusting her casual jacket as they walked toward the waiting Land Rover. Charles nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what this would entail. The commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, had been deliberately vague about the evening's plans, mentioning only that the troops wanted to show their appreciation in their own way. The drive through the German countryside revealed a landscape still marked by recent history. They passed through small villages where British and German families had learned to live side by side, creating an unusual blend of cultures. Diana pointed out children playing football in a field, their laughter carrying across the road. For a moment, the weight of their titles seemed to lift, replaced by something more human and immediate. "Look at them," Diana said, watching a group of German children wave enthusiastically at their passing vehicle. "They have no idea who we are, do they?" Charles smiled despite himself. It was true. To these children, they were simply strangers in a car, worthy of friendly wave, but nothing more. The simplicity of the moment struck him as profoundly refreshing. Colonel Harrison met them at the base entrance with a warmth that immediately put them at ease. A career soldier with 23 years of service, he had specifically requested this informal visit after hearing about the couple's interest in meeting troops away from the usual ceremonial settings. His weathered face broke into a genuine smile as he shook hands with both royals. "Your Royal Highnesses, we're delighted you could join us. The lads have been preparing something special, though I should warn you, it's not exactly what you might expect from a royal visit." His eyes twinkled with barely contained mischief, suggesting that the evening ahead would break several protocols. The base itself buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread quickly among the troops that this visit would be different from the usual formal inspections. Soldiers who had been stationed in Germany for months or even years saw this as an opportunity to show their guests what life was really like for British forces far from home. As they walked through the barracks, Diana stopped frequently to chat with individual soldiers. She asked about their families, their hometowns, and how they were adjusting to life in Germany. Her questions weren't rehearsed or formal. They carried genuine curiosity about these young men's experiences. Charles watched her interact with growing admiration, seeing a side of his wife that rarely emerged during their official engagements. Sergeant Michael Roberts, a 24-year-old from Liverpool, was polishing his boots when Diana approached. He scrambled to attention, but she waved him back down with a laugh. "Please, don't stop what you're doing. I'm curious about how you keep them so spotless." Her genuine interest in the mundane details of military life surprised everyone, including Charles. "It's all about the technique, ma'am," Roberts explained, demonstrating his method with obvious pride. "My dad taught me this when he served in Cyprus. Said you could tell a lot about a soldier by his boots." Diana listened intently, asking follow-up questions that showed she was truly engaged rather than simply being polite. The afternoon progressed through various barracks and facilities, with both royals showing unexpected enthusiasm for the everyday realities of military life. They visited the mess hall during dinner preparation, watched training exercises, and spent time in the communications center learning about the base's role in Cold War operations. Charles found himself particularly drawn to conversations with older soldiers who had served in multiple conflicts. Their stories of service, sacrifice, and camaraderie reminded him of his own naval experience and The bonds formed between men facing uncertain futures together. These conversations felt more substantial than most of his official duties, grounded in real experience rather than ceremony. As evening approached, Colonel Harrison gathered the royal couple near the officers' mess. "Now comes the part one mentioned earlier," he said with a grin. "The lads have set up something in the sergeant's mess. It's not fancy, but it's how we actually spend our free time here. Would you be willing to join us for a proper evening?" Diana and Charles exchanged glances. Protocol dictated that they should probably return to their accommodation for a formal dinner, but something in the colonel's invitation appealed to both of them. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Charles asked, his curiosity clearly piqued. "Beer, conversation, and some stories that probably shouldn't be repeated back in London," Harrison replied honestly. "Just a chance for you to see how British soldiers actually unwind when they're thousands of miles from home." His straightforward approach cut through the usual diplomatic language that surrounded royal visits. Diana spoke first. "That sounds perfect. We'd love to join you." Her answer surprised Charles, but as he thought about it, he realized he was equally curious about this glimpse into authentic military culture. The evening ahead promised to reveal sides of both the troops and themselves that rarely saw daylight. The sergeant's mess had been transformed from its usual state, but not in the way typical of royal visits. Instead of formal decorations and ceremonial displays, the room simply felt more welcoming. Tables had been arranged to encourage conversation rather than formal seating arrangements, and the atmosphere hummed with anticipation. As they entered the mess, applause broke out from the assembled soldiers. But this wasn't the polite, measured applause of formal occasions. This was genuine appreciation from men who felt honored that these two people had chosen to spend their evening in such an informal setting. The warmth of the reception caught both Charles and Diana off guard. "Welcome to our real world," called out Sergeant First Class David Thompson, raising his beer in salute. "Hope you're ready for an evening you'll actually remember." His comment drew laughter from the crowd and seemed to set the tone for everything that would follow. Colonel Harrison handed each royal a beer, an action that would have horrified palace protocol officers. "These are our guests tonight," he announced to the room, "and in here, that's exactly what they are, guests." The distinction was subtle but important, establishing that the usual formalities would be set aside for the evening. Charles accepted his beer with obvious pleasure, while Diana surprised everyone by taking a healthy sip immediately. "This is much better than champagne," she declared, drawing cheers from the assembled soldiers. Her comment broke whatever remaining ice existed and signaled that the evening would indeed be different from anything they had experienced before. The conversation that followed flowed naturally, touching on everything from homesickness to the strange experience of representing Britain in a foreign country. Soldiers shared stories about their families, their fears, and their hopes for the future, while Charles and Diana found themselves responding with unexpected openness about their own experiences. What emerged was not a royal visit in any traditional sense, but rather a genuine exchange between people who had found themselves in extraordinary circumstances through very different paths. The beer helped, certainly, but more importantly, the setting allowed for conversations that would have been impossible in any formal context. As the evening deepened, it became clear that something special was happening. The usual barriers between royalty and subjects were dissolving, replaced by the simple recognition of shared humanity. The stage was set for moments that would surprise everyone present, including Charles and Diana themselves. The sergeant's mess gradually filled with laughter as the evening progressed. Diana found herself seated between Corporal James Mitchell, a mechanic from Manchester, and Sergeant Patricia Wells, one of the few women stationed at the base. The conversation had moved beyond polite inquiries into genuine exchanges about the challenges of military life abroad. "The hardest part isn't the work," Patricia explained, nursing her second beer. "It's missing the small things from home. The way rain sounds different here, how the shops smell, even the way people queue differently." Diana nodded thoughtfully, recognizing a longing she understood all too well, though from a completely different perspective. Charles had gravitated toward a group discussing the technical aspects of their equipment. Flight Sergeant Robert Hayes was explaining the modifications they had made to their communications systems, adaptations born from practical necessity rather than official procedure. Sometimes the manual just doesn't account for German weather and British ingenuity, he said with a grin. You mean British stubbornness, corrected Sergeant Thompson, raising his bottle in mock toast. The comment drew laughter from the group, including Charles, who was discovering that these men had developed their own culture of gentle irreverence that somehow coexisted perfectly with their professional competence. What struck Diana most forcefully was the absence of the careful deference she usually encountered. These soldiers treated her with respect, certainly, but also with a casual friendliness that she rarely experienced. When she asked about their experiences, they answered honestly, without the filtered responses she had grown accustomed to receiving. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Corporal Mitchell's question carried genuine curiosity rather than nervousness. Diana encouraged him to continue. What's it actually like doing those formal events all the time? Do you ever get to just be yourself? His directness surprised her, but she found herself wanting to give an equally honest answer. That's a very good question, Diana replied, considering her words carefully. Most of the time, it feels like playing a very long, very public game where everyone knows the rules except me. Tonight feels different. Tonight feels real. Her honesty created a moment of silence before several soldiers nodded in understanding. Meanwhile, Charles was learning about the unique challenges of maintaining British military standards while adapting to German regulations and customs. The stories he heard revealed a level of creativity and problem-solving that impressed him. These weren't just soldiers following orders. They were representatives of Britain who had found ways to honor their duties while building genuine relationships with their German counterparts. We've got a football league going with 3 German units, explained Sergeant Wells. Started as a way to improve relations, but honestly, it's become the highlight of most weeks. Competition brings out the best in everyone, and beer afterward brings out the friendship. Charles found himself genuinely interested in the details of this informal diplomacy. The conversation naturally turned to stories from home, and Diana discovered that several of the soldiers came from areas she had visited during her official duties. But hearing about these places from the perspective of people who had grown up there revealed layers she had never seen during her formal visits. I'm from Grimsby, said Private Kevin Foster, a quiet young man who had been largely listening until now. Remember when you visited the fishing docks 2 years ago? My dad was one of the workers you talked to. He still talks about how you asked about his nets like you actually care how they worked. Diana remembered the visit and found herself curious about the impact of these brief encounters. How is your father now? She asked. Is the fishing still good? Her follow-up questions showed a level of genuine interest that surprised Private Foster. Most official visits, in his experience, involved pleasant conversations that ended the moment the cameras stopped rolling. He's doing well, ma'am. Still working, still complaining about the weather affecting the catch. He'd never admit it, but he was proud that you remembered his name during the conversation. Made him feel like his work mattered to more than just the fish buyers. The simple honesty of the response touched Diana more than elaborate compliments ever could. Charles overheard this exchange and found himself reflecting on his own public interactions. How many people had he spoken with briefly who had carried those conversations with them long afterward? The thought was both humbling and encouraging, suggesting that their public duties might have more lasting impact than he had realized. As the evening progressed, the beer had the effect of lowering barriers that normally seemed insurmountable. Conversations became more personal, more revealing. Diana learned about the girlfriend back home who was considering ending a long-distance relationship, the mother battling illness while her son served abroad, the financial struggles that military pay sometimes couldn't quite address. In return, she found herself sharing observations about the loneliness that could exist even when surrounded by people, about the challenge of maintaining authentic relationships when your every move was scrutinized, about the simple pleasure of conversations that weren't carefully managed by protocol officers. Charles discovered that these soldiers had developed their own sophisticated understanding of international relations through their daily interactions with German civilians and officials. Their insights, born from practical experience rather than diplomatic theory, often cut straight to the heart of complex issues with surprising clarity. The thing about working with the Germans, observed Sergeant Hayes, is that they respect competence above everything else. Doesn't matter what your accent is or where you went to school. Can you do the job? That's all they want to know. Charles found this perspective refreshing after years of interactions filtered through multiple layers of diplomatic courtesy. The conversation took an unexpected turn when someone asked about the pressures of public life. Diana had been asked similar questions countless times, but always in formal interviews with predetermined answers expected. Here, in this relaxed setting, she found herself giving an unusually candid response. "The strangest part," she said, swirling her beer thoughtfully, "is that millions of people think they know you based on photographs and newspaper stories, but sometimes you wonder if anyone actually knows who you are when the cameras aren't rolling." The soldiers listened with obvious attention, many nodding in recognition of their own experiences with public perception versus private reality. Sergeant Thompson shared his own version of this disconnect. "My mom still thinks I spend my days marching around in perfect uniforms, saluting officers. She'd be shocked to know that yesterday I spent 4 hours under a truck in the rain trying to fix a hydraulic leak with parts we improvised from old equipment." His story drew understanding laughter from a group. What was emerging was a fascinating exchange of perspectives between people who lived very different versions of public service. The soldiers were discovering that royalty involved its own forms of duty, sacrifice, and adaptation, while Charles and Diana were learning about the practical realities of representing Britain in ways that rarely made headlines. The beer continued flowing, and with it came stories that grew progressively more revealing. Someone mentioned the German beer garden, where several soldiers had accidentally started an international incident by singing British football songs too enthusiastically during a World Cup qualifier. The story involved misunderstood lyrics, overly patriotic Germans, and a diplomatic resolution that had required 3 rounds of drinks for everyone involved. Diana laughed until tears came to her eyes, imagining the scene and the reports that must have been filed afterward. "Please tell me someone took photographs," she gasped between laughs. The request seemed to break down another barrier, as several soldiers suddenly became eager to share their own stories of cross-cultural misunderstandings and the creative solutions they had developed. Charles found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. The combination of good beer, honest conversation, and the absence of formal expectations had created an atmosphere he had almost forgotten was possible. He caught Diana's eye across the table and saw the same mixture of surprise and pleasure reflected in her expression. The evening was revealing aspects of both their personalities that rarely emerged in their usual contexts. Away from the constraints of protocol and the weight of constant scrutiny, they were rediscovering not only themselves, but also each other. The soldiers had inadvertently created the perfect environment for this rediscovery, one built on shared humanity rather than royal deference. As glasses were refilled and the conversation continued to flow, it became clear that this evening was becoming something none of them would forget. The laughter that filled the mess hall carried a quality of genuine joy that had been absent from too many of their public appearances. Something was shifting, and everyone present could feel it happening. The moment that would define the entire evening began with Sergeant First Class David Thompson standing up with his beer bottle raised. The conversation had been flowing steadily for over 2 hours, and the atmosphere had reached that perfect point where formality had completely dissolved while genuine warmth had taken its place. "I've got a toast," Thompson announced, his voice carrying the slight roughness that comes from years of shouting orders over engine noise. The room quieted with the practiced efficiency of military personnel responding to a senior non-commissioned officer. "To our guests, who came here expecting to meet soldiers and instead found out they were just people like the rest of us." The toast brought applause and laughter, but Thompson wasn't finished. "And since you've been such good sports about everything, we've got a little surprise for you." He gestured toward the corner where someone had wheeled in an old, upright piano, its wooden surface scarred from years of service in various military installations. "Oh no," Diana said with mock alarm. "Please don't tell me you expect us to perform." Her comment drew immediate protests from the assembled soldiers, who assured her they had no such cruel intentions. The piano, they explained, was for their own entertainment, part an evening tradition that helped them cope with the isolation of foreign service. Corporal Mitchell, who had been quietly nursing his beer, moved toward the piano with obvious familiarity. His calloused fingers, more accustomed to mechanical work than musical instruments, found the keys with surprising gentleness. The opening notes of "Danny Boy" filled the mess hall, transforming the atmosphere from jovial to deeply moving. As Mitchell played, other voices began joining in, creating an impromptu chorus that reflected the diverse backgrounds of the soldiers present. Welsh voices blended with Scottish accents, London sounds mixed with northern dialects, creating a tapestry of British identity expressed through shared song. Diana felt something shift inside her as she listened. This wasn't a performance designed to impress royal visitors. It was an authentic expression of homesickness, solidarity, and hope. The men weren't singing for her and Charles. They were singing for each other and simply allowing their guests to witness this intimate ritual. When the song ended, the silence that followed carried more weight than any formal ceremony Diana had ever attended. These men, thousands of miles from their families and everything familiar, had created their own traditions to maintain connection with home and with each other. "That was beautiful," Charles said quietly, his voice carrying genuine emotion. "How often do you do this?" The question prompted an explanation of their evening gatherings, informal sessions where anyone could contribute music, stories, or simply the companionship that made foreign service bearable. Flight Sergeant Hayes answered, "Usually Friday nights when the work week ends, but we're still too far from home to visit family. Started as a way to blow off steam, but it's become something more important. A way to remember who we are when everything else feels foreign." The explanation resonated with Diana in ways she hadn't expected. Her own life often felt like foreign service in her own country, surrounded by traditions and expectations that sometimes felt more alien than German customs probably did to these soldiers. The parallel hadn't occurred to her until this moment. "Do you take requests?" she asked with a smile that carried mischief. The question brought immediate enthusiasm from a group, with several soldiers calling out suggestions ranging from traditional folk songs to contemporary hits. The energy in the room shifted again, becoming more playful, but retaining its underlying warmth. "What would you like to hear?" Mitchell asked from the piano bench, his hands poised over the keys. Diana considered the question seriously, thinking about songs that might bridge the gap between her world and there's music that could speak to shared experiences despite different circumstances. "Do you know we'll meet again?" she asked. The choice surprised everyone, including herself. The World War II classic had been one of her grandmother's favorites, a song that spoke to separation, hope, and the faith that difficult times would eventually end. It seemed appropriate for soldiers serving far from home. Mitchell's face brightened with recognition. "My grandfather used to sing that during the war," he said, beginning the familiar introduction. Said it got him through some dark times in North Africa. As he played, the connection between past and present service became tangible, linking these modern soldiers with previous generations who had faced their own challenges far from British shores. As the song progressed, voices joined in gradually. Some soldiers knew all the words, others hummed along, but everyone participated in their own way. Diana found herself singing more confidently than she had in years, her voice blending with the others rather than standing out as a royal performance. Charles watched his wife with growing amazement. The woman singing beside him bore little resemblance to the carefully controlled public figure he had grown accustomed to seeing. This Diana was relaxed, genuine, and fully present in the moment. Her laughter during the musical interludes sounded different from the polite responses she typically gave during official functions. When the song ended, Sergeant Wells suggested another classic, Pack Up Your Troubles. The choice proved inspired, as it encouraged participation from everyone regardless of musical ability. The chorus became a group effort that filled the mess hall with voices raised in shared celebration rather than individual performance. Diana surprised everyone by suggesting Jerusalem, Blake's poem set to Perry's music that had become an unofficial English anthem. The choice demonstrated a deep understanding of what these soldiers needed to hear, words that connected them to the England they served while acknowledging their current distance from it. As Mitchell found the opening chords, a hush fell over the room. This wasn't just any song. It carried special meaning for people serving their country abroad. The words about building Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land spoke to their hopes for return and their reasons for service. The performance that followed transcended simple entertainment. Voices that had been joking and casual minutes earlier now carried the weight of genuine emotion. These men were singing about the country they represented, the values they upheld, and the future they hoped to help create through their service. Diana felt tears forming as she sang, moved not just by the music, but by the palpable sense of shared purpose filling the room. These soldiers weren't just doing jobs. They were living their commitment to something larger than themselves. The realization made her own public duties feel more meaningful than they had in years. Charles found himself deeply affected by the experience as well. The gap between his formal responsibilities and genuine service had been troubling him lately, but seeing these men's authentic dedication reminded him why their duties mattered. Public service, done with genuine commitment, could indeed make a difference in people's lives. When the song concluded, the applause was spontaneous and heartfelt, but the mood didn't become heavy or overly serious. Instead, it felt cleansed, as if the shared music had created a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that could support whatever came next. "Your turn," Thompson announced with a grin, looking directly at Charles and Diana. "Everyone contributes eventually. That's the rule." The challenge was delivered with enough humor to avoid pressure, but the expectation was real. The soldiers had shared their tradition. Now they wanted their guests to participate fully. Diana and Charles exchanged glances, communicating silently as couples do after years together. The look that passed between them carried surprise, amusement, and a shared willingness to embrace this unexpected moment. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. "I don't think we'll do the music any favors," Charles warned with a laugh. "But if you're sure you want to risk it." His comment drew encouraging cheers from the assembled soldiers, who seemed more interested in participation than performance quality. The stage was set for something unprecedented in both their public and private lives. The evening had already exceeded every expectation, but the most memorable moment was yet to come. The combination of beer, music, and genuine camaraderie had created conditions for the kind of spontaneous joy that had been missing from their lives for far too long. What happened next would become the stuff of legend among the soldiers stationed in Germany, though none of them would ever speak about it publicly. Diana stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had decided to abandon all pretense, her smile carrying a mixture of determination and mischief that Charles hadn't seen in months. "Right then," she announced, "but I choose the song." Her declaration brought immediate cheers of approval from the assembled soldiers, who sensed that their royal guest was about to do something completely unexpected. The anticipation in the room was electric as everyone waited to see what she had in mind. "Do you know my old man's a dustman?" Diana asked Mitchell, who was still seated at the piano. The question brought an explosion of laughter from the soldiers and a look of absolute astonishment from Charles. The Lonnie Donegan classic was about as far from royal protocol as music could get, a working-class anthem that celebrated ordinary people doing unglamorous but necessary work. Mitchell's grin threatened to split his face as he found the opening chords. "Ma'am, I think I love you," he declared, drawing more laughter from the crowd. The choice was perfect for the setting. irreverent enough to shock while being innocent enough to avoid real offense. Most importantly, it was the kind of song that invited enthusiastic participation rather than careful performance. Diana began singing with gusto, her voice carrying the Cockney inflection that the song demanded. She threw herself into the performance with complete commitment, using gestures and expressions that would have horrified her etiquette instructors but delighted her current audience. The transformation was remarkable. The polished princess had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely free. The chorus invited group participation, and the soldiers responded with enthusiasm that shook the building. Voices that had been tentative during the earlier, more serious songs now bellowed with joy as they celebrated this moment of pure, silly fun. The beer had certainly helped, but the real magic came from the complete abandonment of pretense. Charles watched his wife's performance with amazement that gradually shifted to admiration and then to something approaching awe. This was the woman he had fallen in love with years earlier, the one whose spontaneity and warmth had cut through the formality of their early courtship. Somewhere along the way, that person had been buried under the weight of royal expectations, but she was clearly still there. As the song continued, Diana began incorporating some of the soldiers into her performance. She pulled Sergeant Thompson forward to sing backup vocals, enlisted Corporal Mitchell to provide percussion on an imaginary washboard, and generally turned the entire mess hall into an impromptu music hall performance. The energy was infectious. Soon everyone was singing, clapping, or providing improvised sound effects. The formal distance between royalty and subjects had completely evaporated, replaced by the simple joy of shared silliness. It was impossible to maintain dignity while singing about dustmen, and nobody seemed to care about trying. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. But Diana wasn't finished. "Charles, your turn," she announced, her eyes sparkling with mischief and challenge. The look she gave him carried years of unexpressed feelings about their public constraints and a clear invitation to join her in this moment of liberation. Charles felt something stir inside him, a response to his wife's challenge that surprised him with its intensity. The evening had already shattered so many of his assumptions about himself and their relationship. Why not complete the transformation? "Right," he said, moving toward the piano with newfound determination. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it properly." His comment brought cheers of encouragement from the soldiers, who sensed that their male royal guest was about to match his wife's abandonment of protocol. Charles leaned over to whisper something to Mitchell, whose eyes widened before he broke into delighted laughter. "Oh, this is going to be good," the corporal announced to the room, his hands moving to find the opening chords of whatever Charles had requested. The opening notes of Monty Python's Lumberjack song filled the room, bringing immediate recognition and absolute hysteria from the assembled soldiers. Charles had chosen something even more outrageous than Diana's selection, a song that was not only silly, but required comic timing and theatrical performance to work properly. Charles began the song in his most serious voice, treating the ridiculous lyrics about cross-dressing lumberjacks with the same gravity he might bring to a state dinner toast. The contrast between his formal delivery and the absurd content created exactly the kind of comedy that the song required. Diana watched her husband's performance with growing delight and amazement. This was a side of Charles she rarely saw, someone willing to be completely ridiculous for the sake of entertainment and connection. The man singing about wearing women's clothing and hanging around in bars was barely recognizable as the future king she had married. As the song progressed, Charles began incorporating the soldiers into his performance just as Diana had done. He assigned different sections to sing the female chorus responses, turned the mess hall into a Canadian forest, and generally transformed serious military personnel into participants in an absurdist musical theater production. The sight of the Prince of Wales leading a room full of soldiers in a song about a transvestite lumberjack was so surreal that several participants had to stop singing because they were laughing too hard to continue. But Charles pressed on with the determined focus he usually reserved for matters of state, treating this performance as if it were the most important duty he had ever undertaken. When he reached the final verse, something magical happened. Diana spontaneously joined him for the chorus, their voices blending as they sang together about pressing wildflowers and wearing high heels. They looked at each other during this moment with expressions of shared joy and surprise, as if they were rediscovering something they had lost without realizing it was missing. The song ended with both royals taking an elaborate bow to thunderous applause. But the moment that would be remembered most clearly came immediately afterward, when Charles and Diana looked at each other and began laughing. Not the polite, measured laughter of public appearances, but genuine, helpless laughter that seemed to surprise them both with its intensity. They laughed until tears streamed down their faces, holding onto each other for support as the absurdity of their situation struck them fully. Here they were, thousands of miles from home, in a military mess hall, having just performed comic songs for an audience of soldiers they had met that afternoon. The entire situation was so far beyond anything in their normal experience that laughter became the only possible response. The soldiers watched this display with obvious pleasure, understanding that they were witnessing something rare and precious. The couple before them weren't performing now. They were simply being human, experiencing unguarded joy in each other's company. It was exactly the kind of moment that their evening's hospitality had been designed to create. Sergeant Wells wiped her own eyes and called out, "That's what we call a proper Royal Command performance." Her comment brought fresh laughter from everyone, including Charles and Diana, who were still struggling to compose themselves. "I think," Diana managed between gasps, "that we may have just violated every protocol ever written." Charles nodded agreement, which only triggered another wave of laughter. The idea that they had just spent the evening being completely themselves, without regard for royal dignity or public image, struck them as hilariously liberating. Colonel Harrison, who had been watching from the back of the room with obvious satisfaction, raised his beer bottle in a final toast. "To the evening we'll never officially admit happened," he announced, bringing cheers of agreement from everyone present. The toast was perfect, acknowledging both the special nature of what they had shared and the reality that such moments could only exist outside the usual constraints of their public lives. But as they raised their glasses together, everyone in the room understood that they had participated in something genuinely significant. The laughter between Charles and Diana continued, fed by the shared recognition that they had just experienced something wonderful together. For the first time in months, they were looking at each other without the weight of public scrutiny or private disappointments. They were simply two people who had just made fools of themselves together and found joy in the shared experience. The evening was winding towards close, but its impact would last far longer than any of them could have imagined. The walk back to their accommodation took place under a canopy of German stars, the crisp autumn air sobering them slightly, but not diminishing the warmth that had been kindled during the evening. Charles and Diana moved slowly, neither eager to end what had become an unexpectedly significant night. Their conversation flowed with an ease that had been absent from their private moments for far too long. "I can't believe we just did that," Diana said, shaking her head with lingering amazement. "When I woke up this morning, singing about dustmen and lumberjacks was definitely not on my agenda." Her laughter carried a different quality now, softer, but no less genuine than the helpless mirth that had overcome them earlier. Charles smiled, still processing his own surprise at the evening's events. "I haven't felt that free in years," he admitted, the honesty of the statement catching him off guard. "Those men created something special tonight, didn't they? An atmosphere where we could just be ourselves without consequence." The insight was accurate, but incomplete. The evening's magic hadn't come just from the soldiers' hospitality, though their warmth and authenticity had certainly provided the foundation. What had made the night truly special was seeing each other respond to that freedom, discovering that beneath the accumulated weight of royal duty and public scrutiny, The people they had originally fallen in love with were still there. Diana stopped walking and turned to face her husband. "Charles, when did we stop laughing together?" The question carried years of accumulated observation and regret. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when their shared joy had been displaced by duty and distance, but tonight had made the absence starkly apparent. The question hit Charles with unexpected force. He thought about their early relationship, the private moments when they had found each other genuinely funny and delightful. Somewhere along the way, their interactions had become careful, measured, designed to avoid the conflicts that seemed to arise whenever they dropped their guard. "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but I know I miss it. I miss us." The admission felt vulnerable, but necessary. The beer had certainly helped lower his usual defenses, but the real catalyst was seeing Diana as he had tonight, unguarded and genuinely joyful. It reminded him why he had pursued her so persistently during their courtship. They resumed walking, but now their steps were synchronized, unconsciously matching each other's pace as they had learned to do during countless official walkabouts. The difference was that tonight it felt natural rather than choreographed, a choice rather than a requirement. "Those soldiers see so much more clearly than we do sometimes," Diana observed. "They know exactly why they're here and what they're working toward. When did everything become so complicated for us?" Her question reflected the growing disconnect she felt between their public purpose and their private reality. Charles considered her observation carefully. The soldiers they had spent the evening with possessed a clarity of mission that he envied. Their duties were difficult and demanding, but they served a clear purpose that gave meaning to their sacrifices. His own role often felt more ambiguous, bound by tradition, but sometimes disconnected from tangible impact. "Maybe we've been trying too hard to be perfect," he suggested. "Tonight we were just people enjoying each other's company, and it felt more real than anything we've done in months." The realization carried implications that went far beyond a single evening's entertainment. As they approached their quarters, both were reluctant to let the evening end. The return to their formal accommodation would inevitably bring back the weight of their official roles and the careful distance they had learned to maintain to avoid disappointment and conflict. "Do you think," Diana asked hesitantly, "that we could try to remember this? Not just the singing and the laughter, but how it felt to genuinely enjoy being together." Her question carried hope, but also the recognition that their usual environment made such moments difficult to sustain. Charles stopped walking and took her hand, a gesture that felt both familiar and surprisingly intimate after their period of growing apart. "I'd like to try," he said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that had been missing from their interactions for too long. "Tonight reminded me of who we can be when we're not trying to be anyone else." The conversation that followed lasted until well past midnight. They talked about their early relationship, the pressures that had gradually accumulated, and the ways they had stopped seeing each other clearly. The discussion wasn't entirely comfortable, but it was honest in a way that their communication had rarely been recently. Diana spoke about feeling lost in the maze of royal expectations, about missing the connection they had shared before duty and protocol had overwhelmed their personal relationship. Charles talked about his own struggles with the gap between his preparation for kingship and the reality of waiting for a role that remained perpetually future. What emerged was a recognition that they had both been struggling with similar feelings of disconnection and uncertainty, but had been addressing those struggles separately rather than together. The evening with the soldiers had reminded them that support and understanding could make even difficult circumstances more bearable. As they finally prepared to separate for the night, Diana made a suggestion that would have surprised both of them that morning. "When we get back to London, could we try to find more moments like tonight? Maybe not exactly like tonight," she added with a laugh, "but times when we can just be ourselves with each other." Charles agreed immediately, though both understood that the challenge would be significant. Their London life was structured around obligations and appearances that left little room for spontaneity or genuine privacy. But The evening had proven that those moments were worth fighting to preserve. The impact of that October night in Germany extended far beyond the immediate pleasure of shared laughter and music. For a brief period, Charles and Diana rediscovered what had originally drawn them together: the ability to find joy in each other's company and to bring out sides of their personalities that rarely emerged in their public roles. The soldiers who had unknowingly facilitated this reconnection would remember the evening with pride for the rest of their military careers. They had given their royal visitors something more valuable than a formal inspection or ceremonial review. They had provided an opportunity for two people to rediscover each other in an atmosphere of genuine warmth and acceptance. Colonel Harrison's report to his superiors mentioned only that the royal visit had been highly successful and appreciated by all personnel involved. The deeper truth about what had transpired remained unspoken, but understood by everyone who had witnessed it. In the years that followed, both Charles and Diana would look back on that evening as a reminder of what was possible when circumstances aligned to allow genuine human connection. While they were never able to fully recapture the spontaneous joy of that night, they both carried the memory as proof that beneath the accumulated weight of royal duty, the capacity for simple happiness together remained. The laughter they had shared over beer in a German mess hall became a touchstone for both of them, a reminder that even in the most formal and constrained circumstances, moments of authentic joy could still emerge. The evening had given them a gift that would outlast many of the challenges that lay ahead: the knowledge that they were capable of finding delight in each other's company when given the opportunity to be genuinely themselves. Years later, when journalists and biographers would analyze every aspect of their relationship, none would ever learn about the October evening when the Prince and Princess of Wales sang comic songs with British soldiers in Germany. But for those who were present, the memory remained vivid and precious, a perfect example of what could happen when protocol was set aside in favor of simple human connection. The evening had proven that even royal marriages could benefit from laughter, beer, and the kind of authentic friendship that soldiers far from home had perfected out of necessity. It was a lesson that transcended rank and title, reminding everyone present that the most important moments in life often happen when we stop trying to be impressive and allow ourselves to be simply human.